So when we finish annotating, now is the time that we're going to use what we learned about synthesis. Remember synthesis, reading across several texts and putting the information together. So what we learned about synthesis in our unit of study, now we're going to use that in order to determine some main ideas. All right, so let's just take a look at source one. Everybody's eyes should be up here. Your pencils are down. We're not writing right now. Thank you. Okay, so what was source one about? What was source one about? Sean? It was about bird beaks, right? Luckily, the title tells us, right? And so what did you learn about bird beaks reading that?
Like what they're used for.
Okay, what are they used for? Shan, help them out. Okay, can you put your hand down and talk? Okay, that's a detail, right? But let's think about overall. Okay? Natalie, help us out. Say that again. I heard birds have many different kinds of beaks to do what? Okay, I think that's kind of long. All right. And remember what our thesis is what survival, not adaptation, right? So we don't want to be confusing in our language that we use for our main idea sentences, because we want to make sure that it is really supporting our thesis. Janie, you want to try it out? Okay, how birds have different beaks for survival. The how is in the front of it again. So you could say perhaps birds have different beaks to help them survive. Okay, and a different way of saying it. Elizabeth?
Birds don't have teeth, and it teaches us how they eat without teeth.
Okay, what you're doing is you're talking about a detail. We're trying to get the main idea. Okay, so definitely that would be a detail that would support the main idea, but we want to get a main idea. So we want to think about what Jaden said and try to compose something like that. Yes. Well, in the article, they only talked about one thing that the bird beak was used for. What was the bird beak used for? What was the bird's beak used for, Bryn? Can you be a little bit more specific? Did they attack their prey with it? Read the part where it says they attack their prey with it. I should say your predators. What do birds use their beaks for? Anna? So they can eat, right? To get food. So birds' beaks are designed, all right? Birds' beaks are designed to help them to get food, and obviously we know that we need food to survive, right? Plants, animals, humans, people, we can't survive without food. Okay, we cannot survive without food. So survival, food, and this specific source talked about the bird's beaks. Okay, so let's now try to write together a main idea sentence. Okay, so we know it's about the bird's beaks. We know that the bird's beaks help them to get food in order to survive, right? We also know that they're specially designed, right? They're specially designed. So does anybody want to give it a try with the main idea sentence about the beaks? Going saying it wrong every time. I apologize so much.
Birds use their beaks for survival.
Okay. Birds use their beaks for survival. Okay, that works. A different one? Different one, yes? Birds' beaks are tools for survival. That works as well. A different one? Put your mask on first. Good. Okay. Try to avoid using the word they. Use the word birds. You have to be careful when you're writing your main idea sentence because if you use a lot of pronouns in there, it kind of not only does it weaken it, but then it becomes confusing because we don't know what we're talking about. Okay, so let's go ahead and we're going to start with our first main idea sentence. You can write your own version of this. It needs to be a capital letter and a period at the end. So look at what you have on yours and you may need to revise. We don't want the main idea sentence to contain any details. So we don't want to get specific about hummingbirds or a hooked beak. Okay, we don't want to talk about straining food out. Those are the details that we're going to use inside to explain. Because remember, that's what we want to do. We want to explain what we've learned. We want to inform our reader about what we've learned. It's a sentence. Make sure it begins with a capital letter and ends with a period. Okay, so let's look at source 2. What did source 2 talk about? Octavia, what did source 2 talk about? Migrating. So migration. Now, remember in our unit of study when we talked about how important it was for us to recognize vocabulary? That was important. Remember our lesson on the water cycle? And we identified vocabulary that was important. So when we wrote our summary of the water cycle diagram, we used that vocabulary. It was very important. Okay, so Octavian has identified migration. Okay, that's the topic. All right, that's the topic of that. And it's important to use that word. It's very important to use that word. Okay, so let's think about possible main idea sentences that we could write to support our thesis. Lorenzo, you want to give it a try? Birds migrate to their environment is definitely a sentence, which is good. But how does that tie into our thesis statement? Okay, let's flip and take a look again because we want our main idea sentence to tie into our thesis statement. A and C, you want to give it a try? birds migrate is not a sentence. All right, I guess it is a sentence. Birds is the subject, migrate is the verb, okay? So birds do migrate. However, your main idea sentence doesn't really tie in to the thesis, okay? And that's what we're really working on. Your essay writing that you've been doing, your main idea sentences are not really aligned with the thesis statement. So we want to make sure that it is aligned. Bryn, you want to give it a try? Okay, that sounds very detailed to me. Okay, and you didn't use that word migration or migrate. So we want to make sure that we don't, those details, Bryn, those will be really good inside the body paragraph as you're explaining it, okay? Explaining exactly what migration is, but you definitely want to use either migration or migrate in your main idea sentence. Chen, you want to give it a try? Haley? Closer, yes. Migration. Okay, I suppose is the verb in that case. All right. Sean? You're explaining migration is what you're doing. You're not really writing a main idea sentence when you do that. It's similar to the situation with Bryn. She's explaining what migration is in her main idea sentence, and we don't want to do that. We want to keep it general. Okay? Now, okay. But is it migrating, going to a place? Eliza? And that's a lot of details in there, right? What is something you could say instead of to keep warm and find places to eat? What happens if they're not warm? What happens if they don't have anything to eat? They'll die, right? Right? Say it again. Okay, closer, I think, but not quite there yet. Aiden? That's where we started with Lorenzo. And we're trying to get to a better, more precise main idea. Emma? Okay, that's close. That's close. I know this is difficult, guys, but we really need to work through this because this has to be fixed now. Okay? If you keep doing something wrong repeatedly over and over again, it's much harder to relearn the correct way. It's sort of like the way some of you hold your pencil or form your letters when you're printing. If you learned it the wrong way and you don't follow the correct way to do it, then it's very hard to change the way you hold your pencil by the time you're 10 years old. It's very, very difficult. And when you go to do cursive writing, which we'll do a little bit later on this year, it's almost impossible for you to write in cursive because your hands cramp up because you're not holding it correctly. And if you learned how to print correctly, then moving to cursive writing is actually pretty easy. But if you make your letters the wrong way, if you weren't taught properly in preschool and kindergarten, then it's going to be much more difficult. Okay, so we need to fix this now. Okay, so source 1 talked about the beaks. Source 2 talked about migration. What did source 3 talk about? What did source 3 talk about? Sophia, what did it talk about? It talked about the ways that your birds communicate. Okay, so think about our main idea sentences. What main idea sentence could you write about communication? Elizabeth, you want to give it a try? A to K, help her out.
Birds communicate in different ways.
How does that align with our thesis? What is our thesis about? How does that align with our thesis? Jalila?
Birds communicate to survive.
Thank you. Good job. Okay, so you have a thesis statement. You have 3 main ideas. What do we have to find next? What do we have to find next? Yes. Details. We have to support it, right? We have to support it. Now, I will tell you, you have to be careful because now comes the next task. Remember I talked about close reading? Okay, so in close reading, you reread the same text over and over and over again. So the next step in this process is to read the text set for details. Put your pencils down for a second for me. Look up here. Thank you. When you read, you're only looking for details about survival. How the bird stays alive. There's a lot of information, especially in source 3, about communication, with details about things, ways birds communicate for other things than surviving. So when you read through that source, make sure you have your glasses on and you're just looking for information about how they survive, how they live, how they protect themselves. Okay, so the next step in our workshop is for you to reread and look for details. Now, let me show you something, a kind of a shortcut, because some of you are getting bogged down in your plan. All right, so say I'm going to be talking, I want to support my main idea, birds use their beaks to survive. Natalie, I can't see you. I need you looking up here. Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to go back, and I'm going to look and see what kind of information I have here. All right? So I noticed that the way that this is laid out is that it gives a description of different types of beaks. So I know I'm going to want to talk about long, slender beaks, talk about short, thick beaks, talk about wide, flat beaks, and talk about strong, curved beaks. Okay? This source talks about 4 different kinds of beaks. Kendall, are you paying attention? Okay. 4 different kinds of beaks. So I'm going to want to pay attention to the different types, and I'm going to be looking for information that I can either paraphrase or that I can quote from. Okay? basically what I am doing is I am writing a summary of the information that's in here that pertains particularly, mask up please. Guys, I'm noticing that we're having a real hard time keeping our masks on properly. I'm going to have to start taking behavior points. I know it's uncomfortable. I'm uncomfortable too. So I know I'm going to want to talk about long, slender beaks. Some birds have long, thin beaks that look like straws. An example of this is a hummingbird. Hummingbirds stick their tongue through their long beak to suck the nectar out of flowers. These birds are able to fly from flower to flower quickly to get the food they need through their beak. So basically what this section is saying is that long, thin beaks help birds to sip nectar. Okay? So I know that I want to say that. Long, thin beaks equals a straw, but help to sip nectar from flowers. So when I go to, I understand that you might have the need to yawn, but you really shouldn't make any noise when you do that. It's kind of rude. Okay, so on my, notice it's paragraph 2. On my planning sheet, my first bullet is going to be, whoops, that's the wrong symbol, paragraph 2. I've already written or I've underlined or I've indicated somehow what I want to write for my detail. I'm just telling myself where to go to find it. And one of the things I noticed for some of you who were not able to finish your essay, you didn't have all of the parts of your plan. So we definitely need to practice this some more until we get better at it and the amount of time we take doing it is shorter. Okay, so your next task is going to be to find your details. You have to reread the text set. This time with your lens on trying to find details to support your main idea. Okay, so go ahead and do that. Turn to your text set and start reading and finish your plan.